The train hissed like a wounded animal as it slowed to a stop, steam curling into the cold evening air, and Clara Whitmore stood frozen on the wooden platform with a single battered suitcase at her feet. Wondering how a life could narrow itself down to one moment this sharply, she had crossed 3 states on borrowed courage and a folded newspaper advertisement that promised marriage, shelter, and respect to a woman willing to come west. And now the promise stood somewhere beyond the dirt road, stretching past the station, waiting in the shape of a man she had never met. The conductor tipped his hat and moved on, the train pulling away and taking with it the last familiar sound she knew, leaving only wind, dust, and the distant lowing of cattle. Clara drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders and reminded herself she had chosen this, that choosing was better than starving quietly in a boarding house back east where hope was rationed thinner than bread. When the wagon arrived, driven by a tall man with a rigid spine and eyes the color of weathered oak, she recognized him instantly without knowing how. Elijah Cross did not smile when he saw her. He nodded once, polite but distant, helped lift her suitcase without comment, and turned the horses toward the ranch. The ride was long and mostly silent, the land opening wide and unforgiving around them, and Clara studied the man beside her in small glances, noting the careful way he held the reins, the tension that never left his jaw, the sense that his thoughts were always braced against something unseen. When the ranch finally appeared, a sturdy house set against the darkening sky with a barn standing a short distance away, Clara felt both relief and fear settle into her bones. This was it. This was the place that would either save her or break her. Elijah stopped the wagon and climbed down. Offering a hand she took after a breath's hesitation, her boots touching dirt that felt heavier than the ground she'd left behind. "You can come inside," he said, voice low, measured, as if each word had been weighed first. Inside, the house was clean, simple, warm with lamplight, but not welcoming in the way Clara had imagined during long nights on the train. It felt guarded, like a place that had learned to protect itself from disappointment. Elijah gestured to a chair, poured water into a tin cup, and watched her as she drank, his gaze not unkind but cautious, like a man who had learned the cost of trusting too quickly. She wanted to fill the silence, to explain herself, to prove she was worth the risk he'd taken by placing that advertisement, but her voice tangled in her throat. Finally, she spoke the truth instead. "I know I'm a stranger," she said softly, fingers tight around the cup, "but I will work. I won't be a burden." Elijah exhaled long and slow, and looked toward the hallway that led deeper into the house, then back at her. "This arrangement," he said, "it was meant to be proper. Marriage, a home." Clara nodded quickly. "Yes, of course." Something flickered in his eyes then. Regret, perhaps, or fear, and he stood abruptly, walking to the door and checking the lock as if night itself were a threat. When he turned back, his voice was firmer. "You'll sleep in the house," he said. Relief surged through her so suddenly it nearly brought tears. But before she could thank him, he added, "Not tonight." Confusion spread across her face. "I don't understand." He hesitated, then shook his head. "It's complicated." The weight of that word pressed down on the room. Clara followed his gaze again, sensing a boundary she could not yet see but already felt. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and the sound of the barn door creaking in the distance carried something lonely with it. Clara stood slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can sleep in the barn," she said, the words tasting like surrender. "I don't need much. Just a roof." Elijah's response was immediate and sharp. "No." He moved past her, opened the front door, and pointed toward the barn with a finality that stunned her. Then, before she could react, he closed the door behind her and turned the key, the sound of the lock echoing louder than it should have. Clara stood on the porch, heart pounding, staring at the door in disbelief, the warmth of the house already fading from her skin. For a moment, anger flared hot and bright, but it burned out quickly, replaced by something colder and heavier. She had not come all this way to turn back. She lifted her suitcase and walked toward the barn, the structure looming larger with every step, the darkness inside thick and smelling of hay and animals. She found a small corner where the wind didn't cut as sharply, set her suitcase down, and sat with her back against the wood, listening to the night. Above her, stars stretched endlessly, indifferent to human bargains. Inside the house, Elijah leaned against the door he'd locked, eyes closed, fists clenched, as if holding himself together by sheer will. He told himself it was necessary. that keeping distance was safer for both of them, that some doors once opened could never be closed again. But as the night deepened, sleep refused to come. Images pressed against his thoughts. Clara's tired eyes. The way she had said she wouldn't be a burden. The quiet dignity of her request to sleep in the barn. He told himself he was protecting something fragile, something already scarred by loss, but the truth sat heavier than any excuse. Somewhere between the ticking of the clock and the groan of the wind, Elijah realized that locking the door had not brought peace. It had only drawn a line he would soon be forced to cross. And out in the barn, wrapped in her shawl and staring into the dark, Clara whispered a promise to herself that no locked door could silence. She would endure. She always had, and though neither of them knew it yet. This night, the locked house, the cold barn, the word no spoken too quickly would become the moment everything began to change. Morning came slowly, gray light seeping through the cracks of the barn like a hesitant apology, and Clara woke stiff and cold but strangely steady, as if the hard night had burned something fragile out of her and left resolve behind. She rose quietly, brushing hay from her skirt, her breath puffing in the chill, and for a moment she simply stood there, listening to the ranch come alive, the low shuffle of hooves, the distant call of birds, the soft creak of wood settling into a new day. Inside the house, Elijah had not slept at all. He sat at the small table with a cup of untouched coffee, replaying the sound of the lock turning over and over in his mind, each repetition tightening the knot in his chest. He told himself again that distance was necessary, that rules kept order, that order kept pain from returning, but the excuses rang hollow in the quiet morning. When he finally opened the door and stepped onto the porch, the sight of the barn pulled at him like a question he could no longer avoid. He crossed the yard with long strides and stopped short when he saw Clara already awake, carefully folding her shawl, her movements calm, unaccusing. She looked up surprised, then composed herself quickly. "Good morning," she said, voice even. No trace of the night's hurt carried forward. That steadiness unsettled him more than anger would have. He cleared his throat. "You shouldn't have slept out here." She met his eyes, and for the first time there was a quiet firmness in her gaze. "I did what I had to," she replied. "I always have." The words struck deeper than she could have known. Elijah nodded once, the habit of restraint still clinging to him, and motioned toward the house. "Come inside. We'll eat." At the table, they sat across from each other like strangers again, but something had shifted. Clara ate slowly, grateful for the warmth, and waited. She had learned long ago that patience was not weakness. It was survival. Elijah finally spoke, his voice lower, rougher. "I didn't put that ad in the paper because I wanted company," he said. "I put it there because the ranch needs a woman's," and practical orderly, Clara listened without interrupting. "And because," he continued, eyes fixed on the table, "this house already carries ghosts. I won't add another." Clara set her fork down gently. "I'm not a ghost," she said. "I'm very much alive." Silence followed, thick but not hostile. Outside, clouds gathered and the wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain. Elijah pushed back his chair. "If you're staying," he said carefully. "There will be rules." Clara stood as well. "There always are," she answered. The days that followed settled into a rhythm shaped by work and weather. Clara learned the ranch quickly, her hands blistering, her back aching, but her spirit strangely lightened by purpose. She rose before dawn, cooked, cleaned, mended, and took on chores without complaint. The ranch hands noticed first